Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore relationships, divorce, separation, and parenting apart. This episode is part of our mini-series, where we answer your questions and share practical bite-sized tips. I'm your host, Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In this part 1 mini episode, I'll be sharing some gentle guidance on how to face those difficult conversations many of us instinctively avoid during divorce. From finances and children arrangements to talking about the future, we'll explore why it's so natural to shy away from these difficult discussions and why leaning into them can make the whole process smoother and kinder for everyone involved. Now, if you know somebody, a friend, a colleague, or a family member who would really benefit from this episode, then please click the share button now. And don't miss part 2 in the next In Brief episode, where I'll walk through some simple practical strategies to help these conversations feel calmer, clearer, and a little bit more manageable. Okay, so let's start. What do we mean by difficult conversations? When I say difficult, I mean those talks that make your stomach drop, the ones that you rehearse in your head, but somehow you actually never quite get round to having. And there are lots of those during a divorce and separation. And these can sound like financial settlement type questions. So who gets what, how to divide savings, pensions, properties. Sometimes those conversations are around your children. So where are the children going to live? When are they going to see me? What's the routine going to look like? And how are we going to handle holidays or special occasions? Sometimes they're about financial things like spousal maintenance. So what is it? Do we need it? How am I going to live? If I'm the parent who's been the stay-at-home parent, what's going to happen to me? How long am I going to need supporting? When will I be able to get a job? Sometimes those conversations are around the living arrangements. Do we have to sell the house? Who's going to move out? If not, where are the kids going to stay? How are we going to afford 2 properties? All of these types of conversations are the difficult ones. Sometimes it's about future co-parenting boundaries too. So how and when are we going to communicate? How are we going to handle new partners? And how are we going to make those really tricky, longer-term, difficult decisions together? And sometimes they're just about our feelings, naming something that's hurt you, saying that you're scared, or admitting that you're not happy with the way things are going or the arrangements you've got so far. These conversations can often bring up emotions like guilt or anger or fear or uncertainty. And this is why avoiding them can feel so tempting, because who wants to have that kind of conversation when there's enough admin going on anyway? You might notice yourself changing the subject, shutting down, or telling yourself, I'll bring it up next week, or this just isn't a good time. And then next week never comes and a good time never arises. But if that's the case, then you're not alone. This is really typical behavior and not something you should worry about or be ashamed about. But hopefully today I'm going to help you with getting some strategies for how to overcome this. So let's look at why we avoid these conversations, because there are usually some very human, personal reasons behind it. Firstly, I think the most common reason is really fear and fear of conflict. Perhaps it's already a very difficult time, and the idea that you'll be making that worse by bringing something tricky up, especially if things seem to be okay on the surface, is quite a big deal. You're worried that you'll rock the boat, you'll unpick something that you've already agreed, that it will turn into a big row. And perhaps that's because in the past, any attempt to talk about money or children has blown up. So you think, what's the point? It's only going to make things worse. What are the other reasons that we avoid these conversations? Well, maybe we don't want to upset the children. Maybe it's really difficult to find time alone and quiet out of earshot. And you might convince yourself that just staying silent is a way of protecting the children. Maybe you think if we keep everything calm on the surface, then they'll be fine. But the problem with that is children are very good at sensing tension, even when nothing's being said. So you might think you're doing a good job, but underneath they can feel that something's not right and that the tension is rising. Perhaps it's a question of guilt. Maybe you don't have these conversations because if you're the person who's initiated the separation, you might already feel like you've caused enough pain, and asking for money or saying that you want the house to be sold can feel like adding kind of insult to injury or another level of hurt. So you put your own needs to one side. It might be that you don't make these conversations known because of overwhelm and fatigue. Divorce is exhausting, and you're juggling the practical tasks of getting divorced with the emotional upheaval. You've probably got work that you're still doing, you're parenting potentially as well. And some days it can feel like you simply don't have the emotional bandwidth or energy to sit down and talk about pensions or Christmas contact or whatever else it is that needs discussing. Finally, you might feel, particularly if you're listening to this podcast, a pressure to stay amicable and feel amicable. And, this comes up a lot. People often think that having an amicable divorce is about not rocking the boat, but I disagree. This one comes up when you want to keep things kind of calm and respectful, which is great. But being amicable is not about never disagreeing. Being amicable is about raising stuff, having difficult conversations and disagreeing and still being able to come out the other side. So it usually means being honest, but being kind and working through differences rather than pretending they're not there or blowing things up when people do have the courage to raise issues. So finally, the other reason we put these conversations up, I think, is something along the lines of we think they're going to somehow magically sort themselves out. And if enough time passes, or you just see how it goes, something will happen and it will all sort of magically resolve. But the trouble with that is, you know, often later, when you think these things are going to resolve, will arrive at the worst possible time and you'll just put things off until a worse time. And so it might be even more difficult to have conversations the further down the track you are. And also you leave huge amounts of room for misinterpretation. And, we're all guilty of it, aren't we? If we say nothing, our minds take over and we infill with the worst possible scenarios. And you might actually be building the tension by not having these conversations head on. So why do these conversations really matter? So if avoidance is your normal, why would you push through it? Well, the first reason to try this and to push through and to sort of make yourself a bit uncomfortable, I guess, is that having these conversations will really create some clarity. And living with uncertainty and in limbo is often way more stressful than hearing something you don't want to hear and dealing with something that you find very difficult. So when you know where you stand, whether that's financially, practically, and emotionally, you can start to plan ahead and you can start to heal. And that's the key thing. Secondly, I think having these conversations will protect your co-parenting relationship. So clear agreements around children and money reduce the chances of kind of ongoing arguments. And that's better for both of you, and particularly the kids. So if you can have some conversations and you can get some ground rules established, you're going to allow yourselves to get into a rhythm of co-parenting much more quickly than if you put this off. And ultimately, that's really what your kids need. Really, I think one of the biggest benefits of having these conversations, even though I totally accept they're difficult, is that it prevents resentment. And that's absolutely key. So unspoken expectations are really sort of the bedrock of resentment. They are a recipe for disaster. So if one of you is assuming, for example, that you'll keep the house or that the children are going to be with you every Christmas and the other person assumes something different, you've got a conflict that's just waiting to happen. And the longer it's been brewing, the more of those infilled conversations you've had in your head that are speculative, the worse it can be. So actually preventing the resentment from building up in the first place gives you a better foundation for having some of these difficult conversations and progressing negotiations as well. I think one of the other real reasons to have these conversations is they support your financial stability and that of the kids. It's horrible, isn't it? And we all do it. I'm doing it right now because I know that I've got to go through my own finances and sort everything out because I'm spending too much money and I need to cut back. And it's a horrible thing that I'm thinking, oh, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. But the sooner you do that kind of stuff, the sooner you talk about the finances and the sooner you have those conversations about the financial settlement, the easier it is to plan. So whether that's moving house, whether it's understanding what you've got coming in and going out, whether it's where you're going to live, or, what you can afford going forward and who's going to pay for what and how you're going to manage day to day, the quicker you have those conversations, the quicker you will feel at ease about your finances. And we know from talking to our colleagues at Octopus Money that that's a real de-stressing moment when you've got command of your finances. I think the other reason, one of the other big reasons to have these conversations is what it models to your kids. Children learn a huge amount from how you handle difficult moments. And there's no question about it, a divorce is going to be a really tricky moment in a child's life. But if you can demonstrate to them that you've got this, that you can have these conversations, that you can work together as parents and you can be reasonable and you can negotiate, that is going to give them so much inner stability and strength. They will thank you for it. So if they see you having those hard conversations in a respectful way, even if you don't agree on everything, and I'm not saying that they need to see you blissfully agreeing, but it will show them that conflict doesn't have to be a destructive force. It can be a constructive and a regenerative force as well. So I think what I would say is ultimately avoiding these conversations rarely makes things easier. It usually just delays discomfort and increases the emotional cost later on. Now, if you found this episode helpful or you know somebody who is avoiding a difficult conversation in their divorce or separation, then please do share this episode with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you very much for listening to the Divorce Podcast. I'm Kate Daly, and I'll see you on the next episode.